Welcome to Whispers of the Web, where the hidden gems of the web come to life. Join us as we unravel the most fascinating tales, secrets, and discussions from across the web. Every whisper has a story. If you enjoy our journey through the whispers of the web, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the intrigue. Story number 1. My boss stole my Super Bowl tickets, so one made him lose a major client. With the NFL playoffs back on, I thought you all might enjoy this football-related revenge story. I'm a huge 49ers fan, the rabid all-day tailgate in the parking lot type. A few years ago, we made it back to the Super Bowl. I was working at a consulting firm with a handful of accounts I would interact with directly. One client in particular knew how big of a Niners fan I was. I was the day-to-day lead on his account. He really liked working with me and we became friends, often grabbing drinks or dinner after our meetings. He had access to a pair of extra company seats to the game, and as a thank you, wanted to give them to me as a gift. He passed the tickets over to the partner on that account, who I will refer to as D Head Partner, to be given to me as a surprise. The game came and went, we lost, it sucked. The next time we met, we went to drinks afterward and he mentioned, "Hey, by the way, why didn't you go to the game? I heard someone else was in your seats." I asked, "What game?" He said, "The Super Bowl." Confused, I answered, "I didn't have seats to the Super Bowl?" He told me that he gave D Head Partner a pair of his company tickets for me as a gift so I could attend. I had zero idea what he was talking about. He looked shocked, told me to quietly ask around about it and get back to him. When I was back in the office the next week, I found out through one of the secretaries that D Head Partner had given a pair of Super Bowl tickets to another one of his clients as a gift from our company. I might have let this sort of thing go to keep the peace under different circumstances, but these were seats on the 30-yard line to see the freaking 49ers play in the Super Bowl. I was pissed. I considered confronting D Head Partner myself, but realized it was the client who had noticed I wasn't there in the first place, so if I let him handle it, there would be no blowback on me. So I texted him, "Hey, I just wanted to thank you so much for thinking of me with those seats. It appears that they were given to another one of our firm's clients." He texted back right away, in all caps, "Are you shitting me?" And then, "Pretend I never told you, let me handle." He followed up with me about formulating a plan. A few days later, we were asked to come down for a meeting in their office. The client requested the partner be present, not entirely unusual, so D Head Partner and I hopped a flight the next week and headed over to their office. Little did D Head Partner know, my client had orchestrated a wonderfully awkward little show to catch him red-handed. When we entered the conference room, it was all the usual suspects along with a woman in her 30s we didn't recognize. My client immediately introduces D Head Partner, "This is Stephanie such and such, VP from other department, she wanted to sit in on this meeting." "Hey OP, you guys must already know her from the Super Bowl." She then responds as she goes to shake my hand, "Oh, I don't think so." "Did we meet there? I'm sorry if I forgot." Client responds, "Geez Steph, how much did you have to drink? They were sitting right next to you." Client looks at me, and I say, "Sorry client, I wasn't there." "Are you thinking of someone else?" At this point, D Head Partner is looking visibly uncomfortable, probably trying to come up with an excuse. He starts in with an when Stephanie says over him, "No, so-and-so from other company were in the other seats. By the way, I was wondering why we gave company seats to those guys. Is there a project we're working with them on that I don't know about?" Obviously not, they were in completely different industries. It would be like Coca-Cola partnering with John Deere. D Head Partner lets out an again, and the client immediately speaks over him asking, "D Head Partner, I gave you those tickets for OP?" At this point, D Head Partner is turning bright red. He responds, "Oh, well he wasn't able to make it, so he must have given the seats away to someone else?" And turns to me looking for me to cover for him. Client smirks at me. I respond, what are you talking about?" Client, "You gave me tickets to the Super Bowl?" Client suddenly raises his voice, "D Head Partner, those tickets were a personal thank you gift from me to OP. Did you give them away to someone else? Was it another client?" D Head Partner butts in with, maybe something got mixed up in the office?" Client went quiet for what probably seemed like an eternity to D Head Partner. He then looked down, grabbed his portfolio and iPad, put them into his briefcase, and said, "I think this meeting is over. OP, it seems as if I owe you a thank you gift. Let's go to lunch." "Stephanie, you're welcome to join." "D head partner, I need to evaluate our relationship. Please go back home and expect to hear from us next week." D head partner suggests he would like to join, presumably to do damage control, and Stephanie sternly tells him, "I don't think that's a good idea," and asks the front desk to see D head partner out. As soon as he is in the elevator, we all break out laughing hysterically. Stephanie wasn't really a VP, just an employee at the company who client had drafted into helping with his pre-planned meeting skit, but she did end up coming to lunch with us and was a fellow Niners fan and total blast to hang out with. On our way to the restaurant, I got a desperate text from D head partner saying I needed to cover for the firm and that we could discuss things when I got back. I replied, "Yes, we need to talk, but I'll see what I can do." Client told me to wait a couple hours and then respond to him. 1. To expect invoices for the resale value of the Super Bowl tickets. Resale is way above face value. It was over $10,000, as well as our lunch. He picked a pricey spot and made a big show of overspending, and that he expected them to be paid immediately. 2. Expected I be given a direct apology. 3. Expected a written apology to his company for what he considered theft, and 4. He will only interact with me or another one of our firm's partners, never D head partner. This whole thing caused a stir with the other partners, and I actually came off looking great because it appeared that I had made a good faith effort to save the client for the firm despite being the victim in this situation. The client would transfer to another partner, which meant D head partner lost his profit share on any work with them. Oh, and the other partners in the firm made D head partner pay the invoices back out of his salary. In retrospect, I really have no idea what the hell the guy was thinking. Did he seriously believe the client would just not notice me not thanking him for Super Bowl tickets? Anyway, the work was kind of poisoned for me there long term because D head partner wasn't going anywhere. I left the firm a few months later for a much better position. Client ultimately terminated their relationship with that firm a year later. He actually now works with a good friend of mine at a competing firm. I'm still pissed I missed out on the Super Bowl even though we lost. Hoping we make it back this year so I can finally go to one in person. Go Niners! Story number 2. Former manager made my life hell and I finally got her fired. I was desperate to join a new job after my husband and I were both laid off last year. When I was offered a new role, I knew it would be a step down from what I was doing, but the manager and the team seemed great, and that part has not changed. However, since my manager Gary was so busy, he basically offloaded me to another manager, Jane. I was supposed to be the connection point between my team and Jane, but it quickly became Jane micromanaging me. She would ask me to work through lunch, move or cancel vacation days, call at 11 p.m. on weekends, and order me around on phone calls. She also made nasty comments about my weight and said I was big for my race. The list of personal slights is so long that it filled 3 pages. I would talk back to her and she did not like that, and that provoked her more. I only stayed because we needed to pay the bills. Finally, I had a mental breakdown on a Friday afternoon, after she yelled at me for something trivial about scheduling a meeting without including someone from her team who I didn't know about. I was dealing with a family tragedy and couldn't take it anymore. I told Gary about the situation with Jane and he was sympathetic and not at all surprised considering half her team quit. He immediately offered to move me to a different team under him. I was thrilled. Well, turns out going to the new team didn't help. Jane continued to order me around from afar. When I ignored her emails, she came to my desk one day and started loudly talking about how I am not qualified for this role. Gary overheard and finally told her off, but the verbal abuse did not stop. After 2 months there, I abruptly wrote my resignation letter and stapled the list of Jane's offensive comments and CC'd everyone. Gary offered a bunch of accommodations to try to keep me, but seeing how she was still provoking from afar, I said the only way for me to stay would be for her to go and he did not have authority to let her go. Her manager was in a different country and despite several HR complaints from at least 5 people, nothing was done. So I left, loudly and without shame, telling everyone exactly why I was leaving. Times were very bad for 3 months. There were nights we would eat slices of bread just so we could pay the mortgage and emergency expenses from a health crisis and a funeral. Even after he found a job, we were still catching up on bills and still are. I spent months applying to 5 to 10 roles per day, sometimes over 20. Last month, I saw a public memo about a big shot from a former company joining the company I just left. I used to work with this guy closely and texted him a, "Congrats, let me know if you need any insights on the new place." We had a quick call where I told him some ins and outs, where I thought they could innovate. After this call, he asked me to join the team as his chief of staff. I accepted. Imagine Jane's shock when we had our first all-hands call. All the VPs and above were asked to welcome the new big shot in a giant conference room. In Big Shot's speech, he breezed over that I'll be his chief of staff, along with a few key names. I now sat 2 levels above Jane, and apparently, within the 3 months I was not there, the other half of her team turned over. Every single person left. Gary was excited for me and said all nice things. However, Jane took the classless route and sent Big Shot an email about how I'm an unqualified idiot, that I used to work for her, how I tried to get her fired, and that she suspects I lied to get ahead. She didn't even try to be fake nice. Big Shot forwarded me her email and asked what this was about. I was so nervous and excited. Little did Jane know, I was a director at Big Shot's competitor company and was already a level above her, so 2 levels isn't a big leap, and I worked with him for 5 years. I had an hour call with Big Shot and told him she was bad for the company culture and was a nasty person in general, but the evidence he needed was Gary confirming that her whole team has turned over, my prior resignation letter which was still sitting on my desktop when I logged in upon return, and a few other nasty emails she sent her recent staff, which they were happy to share with us. Big Shot fired Jane on Friday. Story number 3. Boss tried to sleep with my fiancé. This was several years ago. So my boss, an extreme type A personality, found out I was seeing a young lady at another one of our offices. It was a long-distance relationship. He was the type that liked to control everything and mess with people for fun. He was also married to another employee, but he was very unfaithful. And he had a hobby, photography. He liked to take pictures of himself and his conquest, in the act. Then he would show the pictures around the production floor and brag about it. Well, on his next trip to this other office he tried to get my girlfriend to sleep with him, but she spurned him. He made up some lies and got her fired. It took a long time, but I was patient. I knew he kept the photos in his office. He could not risk keeping them at home where his wife might stumble upon them. One Saturday I was working overtime and the cleaning lady came through. They unlocked his office. I came in acting like I was taking dimensions on some drawings. The lady just asked me to close the door when I was finished. She left and went down toward accounting. That's when I went through his desk. Sure enough, in the back of one drawer I found a stack of photos 4 inches tall. I took them all. Then I waited until he went on another trip. When he did, I went out for lunch. I had a dozen pictures of him in the act with 4 different women, all showing his face. The women all had dark or red hair. His wife is a blonde. I drove to the town he lived in, to the closest post office to his house, and mailed the pictures to his wife with no return address. She divorced him, and her lawyer took him to the cleaners. My girlfriend is now my wife, and we aren't mad anymore. Story number 4. When I wrote my dad's obituary, I didn't mention my mom and exposed her years of abuse and neglect. I originally posted this in Petty Revenge, but it was removed, so I'm guessing it's more appropriate for here. My dad died December 1, 2022. He briefly lived with me before his passing after a long stint of being chronically ill for the past 15+ years. As his health declined, he relied more on my mom for things. Prior to this, she was never a great person and fully took advantage of his disability and mobility issues as he declined. For years, she claimed to be separated and divorced, talking to other men on the internet. She made claims many times she was going to move away and marry someone else. In addition, she took advantage of him financially. We tried every legal avenue we could find to have her kicked out, arrested, or force her out, but those attempts were met with responses that it was a civil matter and there was nothing that could be done. He made me durable power of attorney and added me to all his accounts. This is a small portion of her abuse, but I promise her actions were no less than neglectful and exploitive. I'd tried for years to get my dad to move in with me, but he wasn't leaving the house he worked so hard to pay for. I brought him home on hospice the day after Thanksgiving and made sure his final days were the best they could be. After meeting with the funeral home to carry out his final wishes, I was told they required consent from my mother to allow me to cremate him. It was no surprise she initially told me no and only agreed after I allowed her to keep the Social Security survivor benefits, which would have been hers anyway. I wrote his obituary and left her out of it. There was not a single word or mention he'd ever been married or had a spouse. I didn't feel she deserved to be recognized or viewed as a grieving widow when she spent their marriage as a shitty spouse in person. She lost her mind and there were many questions from friends and family alike. I've spent years in therapy working through maternal narcissistic abuse and believe if she didn't want me to talk about it, she shouldn't have done it. When people asked about it, I was honest about the years of abuse my father and I endured from her. I've completely ruined the public image and victim complex she spent years creating. I might be the villain in a hole in this scenario, but I'd do it again in a heartbeat. Story number 5. An attorney's dream case: my parents versus the bank. In 1973, my parents had enough money to build a little ranch house in the country. The small bank in town approved the mortgage and the bank signed a contract to give Bob the money to build the house. Bob, as it turns out, was overbooking himself all over town, leaving his clueless minions to do the actual work. The build took longer and longer, with more and more work having to be ripped out and redone. We're not talking about using the wrong color paint or nailing up some wonky trim here. The architect forgot to fully erase a line on the blueprints and the framers built a wall through the bathtub. My mother was told, don't put anything heavy in the kitchen cabinets, because they were attached to the drywall, not the studs, using a few roofing nails through the back of each cabinet. The garage door opening was framed into the living room instead of towards the driveway. And so on. When the bank's representative showed up for the final inspection, my parents met him in the front yard and refused to sign off on Bob's work. Then representative became angry, as the bank had paid Bob a lot of money. He strode to the front door and pulled on the doorknob, whereupon the entire door, casing included, fell on him. It had simply been wedged, not nailed, into place. The bank called Bob, who finally showed up to supervise the work himself. The only problem was that Bob wasn't any better at building a house than his minions were. My parents still refused to sign off on the house. My mother was a stay-at-home mom in a nasty rental with 2 tiny children while my dad was working 2 jobs while this was going on. Throughout the entire process, the bank and Bob treated them very poorly, bullying my mom and lying to my dad. What should have been an exciting time for my parents was ruined. My mom cried a lot. My dad got depressed. Finally, the bank threatened my parents with foreclosure and Bob threatened to sue my parents for breach of contract because the bank refused to pay him any more money. So my exhausted parents went to an attorney and gave him the rundown. Plumbing, electrical, tiling issues, the whole sorry mess. My parents were scared. All they had was their small down payment savings, so if this became a lengthy court battle, the bank and Bob would win. The attorney, Tom, was kind, but my dad said he could tell that he and Mom were doomed from Tom's facial expressions as he sorted through the paperwork. Then, abruptly, Tom smiled. "Let's get everyone together for a meeting," he told my parents. "Tomorrow." So my parents, Tom, the bank's representative, the bank's attorney, Bob, and Bob's attorney met at the bank. Tom didn't give anyone else time to begin. He said, "Well, my clients have decided that they no longer want this house. Please remove it." Everyone else started to laugh. "Remove it? Have you lost your mind?" Tom, in a sweeping, theatrical gesture, placed a deed on the table. "My clients own the land the house is sitting on outright. They no longer want the house. Get the house off my client's land." Bob's attorney stared at the deed, and then turned and stared at Bob. "You built a house on land you don't own?" Bob nodded. The bank's attorney started yelling at the bank's representative. "You didn't finance the land the house is on?" The representative stammered, No?" Tom said firmly, "As I said, gentlemen, you're trespassing on my client's land. I expect the house to be removed and the land returned to its original state, at once." My dad said he'll remember the blank looks everyone on the other side of the table passed to one another for his whole life. Sure, the bank could foreclose on a house that wouldn't exist by the end of the week, with no way to recoup the money. They didn't even own the land it was on. Bob was out the 50% he'd paid out of pocket, plus he was on the hook for tearing down the house and removing it. On top of that, the bank would undoubtedly want him to repay the initial 50% they'd given him. Could they have gone after my parents? Sure. A foreclosure would have meant bad credit for my parents moving forward. They might lose their down payment. But to sign off on the house in its condition at that time would have meant thousands and thousands of dollars in cash to replace and repair everything from the roof to the basement before the house could be safely lived in. The bank knew my parents didn't have that kind of money. They're the ones who approved the mortgage. Suddenly, my parents were good people. It was all such a misunderstanding, and the bank and Bob couldn't do enough for them. The house was brought in line with the original blueprints and specifications immediately, at no extra cost to my parents, but at considerable cost to Bob. My parents signed the mortgage. Bob got the rest of his money and just about broke even on the build. The bank's representative was fired. And Tom, attorney extraordinaire, got a stinging tale of triumph to recall to fellow attorneys for the rest of his life. Before you question this tale, please remember that 1973 was 50 years ago. Banks did things differently back then. Smaller rural banks, in particular, were not run the same way the bigger, city banks were. There were far fewer federal regulations, and in a smaller community people didn't always follow them, anyway. I'm pretty sure they don't always follow them now. Yes, they built a wall through the bathtub. No, I'm not making that up. I even left out how a plumber left his lunch bag on a partially built kitchen cabinet, but the cabinet maker didn't feel it was his job to move the bag, so he left it there and built the rest of the cabinet around it. I don't know where Bob found these people, but they were gems, every one of them. /S. Edit. I must admit that I'm immensely surprised at the traction this story has gotten. The bank and Bob put together very poorly written and pretty much unenforceable contracts. My parents' attorney figured this out and the bank and Bob had to back off. I thought this was interesting, but surely not the one and only time this happened. Aren't contracts being written all the time by clueless people? Is this really that unique? I guess we should be glad it is. Thanks for reading. Thank you for joining us in today's journey through the whispers of the web. Share your thoughts and suggestions for our next adventure. If you're not yet a part of our whispering community, click the subscribe button and ring the bell for notifications to never miss out on another story. Join us next time as we uncover another enthralling tale from the web. Until our next whisper.